So let's talk about maybe some of the specific challenges that you've faced on in the role, different projects, anything that you might want to share. It sounds like navigating a minefield to me. So what are some common issues that your teams encounter, or any anecdotes you might be able to share?
Yeah, well, I've got many anecdotes. I would start by saying the biggest challenge of doing this job is the fact that you're dealing with very sensitive topics. And for most people who are working on a game or working on a piece of software or something, that's not the kind of discussion you're normally going to have in the office, or is hey, let's talk about the politics of this particular location and what's going to happen in the next election and how that's going to influence the reception of the product that we're trying to get out the door. Or let's talk about how this faith system is different from this faith system and how that's influencing the perception of a certain character that's in our game. Those kind of topics are the kind of thing, at least in a lot of workplaces, is like, yeah, we don't talk about politics and religion and all that, because of the nature of where those discussions can often go. But that is the whole point of my work, is that I have to talk about those things, and we have to be very explicit. And essentially, that's a lot of what this whole process is about. It's making explicit these things that we know a lot of us are thinking about when we're designing a character or designing a game or a world or something. We're have it maybe in the back of our heads that this could be an implication, like, okay, I'm going to design this character who's based on a certain culture, and the clothing that they're wearing has religious implications, but I don't really want that to be conveyed with the character because they're not from that religion, but I still want to use the look that they're using. So now you're starting to build up these potential issues of, now you're essentially building an allegory with a character that looks like they're from a certain culture, but you don't want them to be from that culture. But then how do you separate them? How do you make sure?
From the reality.
Yeah, and that's a concept that I call allegorical distance, where basically you're trying to separate the in-game implementation from the real-world inspiration, because pretty much everything that goes into a game, or pretty much any media today, is inspired by the real world. That's where we get our inspiration as artists and writers and all the other things, that all of our experience we have from travel and everything. And so how do we make sure that we, as we go through the process of creation, are we being very mindful of the influences that we have over the art that we're creating? And that intentionality with the creation process is one of the biggest challenges in this work, because I will go to an artist, let's say, when they're working on a design of something, and I'll have to point out to them and say, hey, I hate to tell you this, but what you've just created, there's a really big potential problem here. This is a issue of cultural appropriation, or it's an issue of allegory problem or something. And oftentimes the reaction I will get tends to be negative, because it's, hey, it's my creative work. Who are you to criticize my creative work? And I'm like, I'm not criticizing your creative work. Your creative ability is phenomenal. It's really amazing. But I'm saying that the decisions you're making around the design are basically treading into a territory where you're starting to, maybe it might be cultural appropriation, and that's something they may not be aware of. And then that's part of the role, is essentially, and I've actually had some of the clients I work with call me their Jiminy Cricket, where I'm sitting on their shoulder, saying, hey, I don't think you should do it that way, just to be like an objective third party that's looking at the process, and I'm not completely attached to the world that's being created, so I'm more objective about it, to basically just say, hey, this looks great, but here's a couple things that we could tweak in order to make sure that the design is not perceived in a way that you don't intend. And so there's a lot of those kinds of conversations that take place. Sometimes they're really easy, they're very surgical in nature, and other times they're much more complicated than that. I can give you an example, actually, and I'm going to try and show you this example. I can just go here and find it, and because I think this is a really good illustration of one of a simple thing where people might just